Hello and welcome to Wool Shift Dust, or should I say Worm Spice Dune? True story. I actually considered for 10 seconds changing the name to that when I was first putting together the initial plan for this series. So I got a few things wrong with the whole first plan. I'm glad I didn't go that direction, but also the fact that I thought I could cover the entire book in a single episode, including community rankings, was adorable. And just wrapping my head around the right format to strike the balance between depth and detail, and also just making this a fun and accessible series. It's one of the reasons why it took me so long to finally kick this thing off. That and, health and hearing loss and other losses in work and all the other obstacles that got in the way, but there's no time like the present. And since it's been a while since this plan was hatched, I thought it would be a good idea to re-release this episode from 2022, where Luke and I discuss Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, and the origin of the book and ideas it was based on. I'm sure many of you haven't listened to it yet, and those of you who have mostly forgotten it by now. So this seemed like a good place to start revisiting this. As far as how the series will go, so we'll get reacquainted with the background info today. And if you're listening as this is released, then 1 week from now, you'll get the breakdown of part 1A of the book Dune, the first 10 chapters through the Hunter-Seeker incident and the immediate aftermath. After that, episodes will be released every 2 weeks. And next up will be Dune, the novel, part 1B. And that will be the rest of the first section of the book, which is conveniently, the book is divided into 3 parts, which are confusingly called books. And the first book within the book is confusingly called Dune. So we'll be finishing that up. After 1A comes 1B, and then we'll do the entire second book or section of the novel. That's called Moadib. Will be the episode after that, followed by an episode dedicated to the third and final section or book of the original novel, The Prophet. We will wrap up the book talk finally with a separate episode ranking everyone's most memorable scenes. I've been collecting dozens of submissions so far, but I would love more. So if you're interested, please send your top 3 scenes from the original Dune novel to woolshiftdustpodcast@gmail.com. You'll hear me ask for that again in this episode that follows. And you'll also find that email address linked in the show notes, of course. With the book thoroughly discussed after those 5 episodes, and all the key characters and plot points and lore is laid out, we're going to turn our attention to the thankless task of trying to adapt this sci-fi magnum opus. So we'll have episodes dedicated to Jodorowsky's infamous attempted adaptation, the Lynch movie that the director disowned from 1984, the games from the 90s, the sci-fi series from the noughties, through to the Villeneuve movies and a look at the games today. Once we've caught up on the 2024 film Dune Part 2, we'll turn our attention to the second book in the original series, Dune Messiah, which will be the basis of the third and final movie in Villeneuve's trilogy. And this coverage in the public feed that's starting today is not to be confused with the extra Dune Book Club episodes. In the Dune Book Club on Supercast and Patreon, we are jumping all the way back to the beginning of the timeline, 10,000 years before the original book. We're going to start with dives into the stories of the Butlerian Jihad, aka the Machine Wars, the events that made the universe the unique place it is in Frank Herbert's novels. And later today, book club members will get the first episode in that series, which is a look at the short story Hunting Harkonnens by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, the earliest story in the Duneverse timeline. And in that episode, I'll walk listeners through how the coverage will unfold for that series from there. And after a few episodes have been released, I'll offer a season pass similar to the Silo season passes, but this one just for the ancient Dune book and story breakdowns. Monthly subscribers, though, of course, will get access to all of these episodes, plus all the prior Silo holiday episodes, etc., as always. Not to mention the other series that we're beginning now, which is looking at each of Hugh Howey's other stories, in addition to the Silo short stories, which were already covered in the Silo Book Club. We're going to be going through the rest of the machine learning collection of short stories, one at a time. And these are going to be shorter episodes, first recapping the story and then discussing it. And these will be released between the Dune episodes. But again, more explanation for those of you who will be listening to that series in the Supercast and Patreon feeds. Today, we're looking back into the past of our own real-world timeline, looking at the life and career of Frank Herbert, everything leading up to the publishing of the complete original novel in 1965, and how his life played out from there. This episode you're about to hear is also a blast from this podcast's past, because again, it was published in 2022, so ignore the mention of anything dated. We are, of course, now between Silos seasons 2 and 3 rather than 1 and 2, for example. But the information that we discuss about Frank Herbert is timeless. And small note, I've just now started reading Frank Herbert's biography, Dreamer of Dune, by his son Brian Herbert. So I'll bring up any interesting points I come across in that book to add to this discussion as we go through the series after this. Just a few more corrections and caveats I want to lay out in advance before you listen to this. I've definitely refined my editing technique since I published this, so it's edited a little fast, a little too tight. Of course, I make reference to one book episode. It's going to be in 5 parts, as I just laid out before this. Part 1 next week, and then the next episodes every 2 weeks after that. My prediction in this episode that Dune Part 2 wouldn't be delayed in the release did not age well, but thankfully it's long been out now. And also, I mentioned a thing about top 3 questions. I don't think there's going to be much time for that, although I want to hear your questions in general as we go through. And as I said, your top 3 scenes as I lay out in this episode, your top 3 most memorable, most iconic scenes from the original book. Another quick correction is that Luke and I are no longer on Twitter anymore. We are now both on Blue Sky. You'll find the links to our profiles there in the show notes. And I have since this read V for Vendetta, and I found it a very good, troubling in the ways it was intended to be troubling, very memorable book that I have thought about a lot since then. Actually got a chance to discuss it and the movie adaptation with the Lorehounds on a Lorehounds 11sies episode, which is a movie club that's in the Lorehounds subscriber feed. And yeah, the references to Secret Invasion also maybe didn't age that well. We were being much kinder back then about it. I think by the final episode, we just kind of fully gave up on that show. Okay, I think that's it. That brings us back up to 2025, but enjoy this dip into the past. And book club members, I'll see you again later. Everyone else, after this, Luke and I will be back in a week with special guest David to talk about the first 10 chapters of Dune, the original novel. Just remember, a journalist will do absolutely anything to avoid finishing their assignments, even penning an epic novel that upends the global concept of science fiction. If you're not yet sure what I'm talking about, keep listening. Hello, Woolshift Dustians. We are back to keep your ears entertained and your minds engaged between Silo seasons. From Sting to Austin Butler and everything before, between, and beyond, Woolshift Dust is doing Dune for our season 2. There will be no spoilers of any kind during this intro episode, and we'll get into exactly what the rest of the season is going to look like in just a moment. But first, Luke, we're back already. How have the London archives been treating you?
They've been treating me well, actually. I've been doing a bit of mentatting down in London.
And we're not going to get into the book just yet. That will be our next episode. But I know that you've been rereading. Last you updated me, you were at the part where the 2021 film ended. How's the rest of the reread going?
I actually finished it over the
Okay.
weekend. Because I'm sure you've had the same experience. When you start Dune, you have to finish it.
Yeah.
It's not a thing you can go and put down and come back to. It kind of has that quality that once you start, you have to finish.
It almost reads itself.
It does. It does.
And okay, so this read, who is your least favorite character? No spoilers.
Least favorite character, got to be the Baron Harkonnen.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, big, truly evil, mustache twirling guy. Yeah, like Herbert goes out of his way to describe him in like physically grotesque
Well,
terms.
because that's one of the most interesting differences they've been making in most of the adaptations is they have because he has these suspenders that help hold him up because of his massive weight. But then the adaptations have him like flying around like a maniac.
Well, the worst one is like
not.
the David Lynch one where like he's got some kind of like uber acne thing going on, like some sort of skin disease, which isn't anywhere in the book.
Yeah, David Lynch was like, how can I make this weirder and grosser?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I on the one hand I would want to say Baron Harkonnen, but he's like so deliciously evil. Like he's just one of the most loathable characters in all of literature that I almost want to say someone else. And then I don't know, it falls on like the Reverend Mother, I guess, because she's just such a pardon me cunt that I just yeah, she just stands in everyone. She's so annoying.
So you say I've been reading it. I kind of have and kind of haven't. I have read a physical copy of Dune many years ago, but because of the nature of what I do for a job, I really don't I read a lot for work, so I'm not really motivated to read outside of that. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
No, yeah, to be clear, when I say reading, I always include audiobooks in that definition.
Okay.
You're consuming the book. Because, I mean, think about, for instance, visually impaired, readers and just people for whatever reason, dyslexia, who knows? There's 1,000 different reasons you might want to read the audiobook.
The version I've got is somewhere between the book and a performance of it, because the way the audiobook is structured, they have different voice actors read from different characters' point of view, and they also have a separate voice actor as the omnipresent narrator, where it's no particular character. It's not being read from a particular character's point of view, and there is music and sound effects. So it is the book, it's the full text, but it's also a bit
an
more
audio play,
a performance and just a straight reading of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's awesome. And I love how the audio options have gotten so much better in recent years. That it's gone from, my friend was telling me that back in the day, a lot of the books weren't even the complete books. Like it would be like Dune abridged, which, come on.
Yeah, who wants to listen to an abridged version of anything?
Right, exactly.
Dune.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, I don't know who the Bene Gesserit are. Moving on. But yeah, no, I'm so glad that that's gotten better, and it's nice that you bring in that perspective of having had the audio experience, where I do tend to cling to the word on paper or word on in this case for this I'm rereading it digitally so that I can do the searching and the highlighting and all that stuff to make my notes. Yeah, because I don't write in my actual books.
Does that remind you of reading the OC Bible then? Because I think one of my favorite bits of the book is when they're describing the tiny, a holographic OC Bible.
Okay.
Because this I was going to say this later, but I might as well say it now. Dune occupies a very special niche in my sort of exposure to fantasy and sci-fi, because I have no visual imagination. I have a very limited visual imagination. Right. So normally I will watch the movie or the TV series first if it's a book, because if you're telling me it's this massive futuristic city, floating in the clouds at 30,000 feet, I can't picture that. I need somebody else to show it to me or I don't get the effect.
Right.
Dune is one of the very rare books where Herbert's description is so evocative that I actually can picture it in my head.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the few bits of media I've read before I've seen any adaptation of it. I mean, I read it.
Okay.
I read it for the first time when I was 15, which I think is the ideal age to read Dune for the
I
first
think I
time.
was
By the
about the
way,
same age too. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's interesting because okay, so what you're describing is aphantasia, and but I know it's, for instance, another person who has it is one of my best friends here in Amsterdam, who is he's an animator. Like his job is a visual job, but still, if you tell him picture yourself on a beach, he's like, I can't complete the assignment. I'm sorry.
yeah,
And on the other hand, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I have hyperphantasia, which means it's very vivid imagination, and this doesn't just apply to visual things, but also imagining other senses too.
yeah,
So yeah, so that's an interesting work. So we're going in with a couple different perspectives. We've got the written versus audio. So I'm looking forward to hearing if you have anything to throw in as we're going through the book about how certain passages were interpreted by the readers. That would be interesting. And also, yeah, we've got the hyperphantasia versus the aphantasia.
yeah.
So on this reread, who's your favorite underrated character or most underrated character for you?
Oh, most underrated character.
Like for me, it's shout out Mapes. Always, I always think like she gets cut out of the
Yeah, that role
adaptations.
really gets minimized.
Mm-hmm.
Stilgar,
Okay, yeah,
because
fair.
I think he goes on a really interesting journey from the beginning to the end of the book, and I think that's really underplayed in all the adaptations that I've seen, and even like in the text of Dune. It's more left up to your imagination to infer how Stilgar got from point A to point B. There's that really sad passage close to the end where Paul talks about looking at him and seeing a follower rather than a friend.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition because it goes to the heart of one of Frank Herbert's themes, which is to be like uber critical of charismatic leadership.
Yeah. So for anyone who's wondering, that's the character is played by Javier Bardem, the leader of the Fremen. Obviously, no spoilers. We'll get into that. Yeah, no, that's fair. And shout out Mapes, of whom I was speaking, is also a Fremen, actually. So it's interesting. We both chose Fremen, but she is a housekeeper in the household of the main character and ends up playing an important role. Yeah, no, I can't wait to talk about that. And yeah, we're going to be getting into all that in our next episode in 2 weeks, where we'll recap and analyze the entire first book, this time with both of us having read it. And yeah, so Dune, it was a book given to both of us by our parents when we were fairly young. I got it from my mom, and you got it from your dad, right?
Well, I got it from both of my parents.
Okay.
We were visiting my aunt in Australia, so that's like a 24-hour flight from the UK. So basically, I got given this by my parents to say,
That's a
look,
sit down and chat.
basically that this will keep you occupied for the length of the plane journey, and it did. And yeah, it was just a really formative book because like so much of what is in Dune, bits and pieces of it feed through into other media.
Oh, absolutely.
And Dune isn't for all the times it's been adapted. It was first released in like 1965. So a lot
Yeah.
of what we think of as sci-fi tropes get their start in Dune, and also just it was really interesting. The first time I read it, the character I identified most with was Paul,
Of course.
of course. But you read it as you get older, and the character I'm most identified now with is probably Duke Leto.
Hmm.
So I wonder whether that's just a function of age or perspective or what. But I just remember being completely blown away by it.
Yeah.
I'd never read anything quite like it because obviously there's the politics of it, which I think is why my parents thought I'd like it. But
Right.
there's the mysticism of it, and there's just the quality of it that sucks you in to this world and these people, and just the vast scale of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of these people, all of this history, um, all of this philosophy, and just the precision of Herbert's writing. Like I say, even for somebody like me with very limited visual imagination, I can picture Dune because the writing and the description is so detailed and so evocative. And also, it talks about things that I find easier to imagine. So a lot of it is sound, smell,
Right.
touch. A lot of it isn't. A lot of what you're being asked to imagine isn't necessarily visual, which I think helps.
Yeah. And so the book was your first exposure then before like the Lynch movie or
Yeah,
anything else? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I honestly, I don't remember when I first read it. I was definitely a teenager. I don't know how many times I've read it. The follow-up novels I've only read once all the way through, twice for the second and third books. And I haven't read the books by Frank Herbert's son at all, that my mom has. I plan on changing that after this, I think. But yeah, I don't know. I also agree that it's changed where maybe the first time I read it, I was more looking through Paul's eyes, and now I'm more looking through Lady Jessica's eyes.
yeah.
So,
I think it is something that I think it is a book that you get more out of if you read it as a teenager for the first time. Because I think there is something. It's the first piece of media I ever came across that really subverted the idea of the hero's journey. You
mhm.
know, this journey that Paul is on, but he has no control over it. He doesn't want to go on this particular journey. He doesn't want to
I
be.
mean, he embraces it
He
at certain
embraces it
points.
in the
Yeah,
end,
yeah,
but
yeah. It's we won't get too much into how, but it subverts the hero's journey trope in ways. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know who Herbert is or doesn't know that Dune was the start of an entire series, much less that it was continued by his son after his death, don't worry. We'll be getting into all that in a moment. This episode, which should be shorter by Will Shift Dust standards anyway, it's all about setting the stage for the whole Dune story. Where did it start and how did it become one of, if not the most famous and influential science fiction stories ever told? It's at least often cited as the best selling science fiction novel of all time. And yeah, as we talk through the timeline today, we'll touch on the topics we'll be covering in future episodes. The Jodorowsky adaptation that never was, but was supposed to give you the experience of a hallucinogenic. The trippy 1984 Lynch adaptation that actually did happen, and how that spurred the Dune series to real fame and spawned some video games too. And yeah, the underrated Syfy adaptation from 2000, the only one that includes some of the book's most iconic scenes. And I know Luke's especially excited. I see him laughing already. And of course, the Villeneuve adaptations, past, present, and future, not to mention Dune Messiah, the second book on which Villeneuve's third film will be based. Luke, of all of these, which are you most excited to talk about, and why is it the sci-fi one?
well, I'm just excited for the sci-fi one because I've only watched that once. I only watched that when
Mm-hmm.
it came out, and
Same, actually.
I just have very odd memories of it. And I want to see if like my imagination has filled in gaps, or it really was that strange. The one I'm actually looking forward to most is talking about the '84 Lynch adaptation
Okay.
because my first exposure to Dune was the book, but my dad's was the
Right.
movie, and my dad loves that movie. Like every time we've changed formats, we've got VHS, we've got DVD, we've got
Yeah.
Blu-ray. It's like every time I'm home, it will either be, do you want to put Interstellar on or do you want to put Dune on? It will be one of those two films. My dad absolutely adores that film, so I've seen that.
Yeah.
I've probably seen that in like three figures. I can quote
Yeah.
large sections of that film from memory.
Yeah, my mom's a big fan too. Maybe not as like to the detriment of all other sci-fi as that, but yeah, that's definitely was her entryway drug that got her on the books and everything else. Yeah.
No, Dad, it's either Interstellar or Dune. One or
Yeah.
the other. Take your pick.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to get into the adaptations that haven't gotten as much attention, but especially like juxtaposing them all together. I think yeah, they're all wonderfully weird, but in vastly different ways. So each is like each is undeniably adapting the same story, but from a different angle. And like the visual creativity these books have inspired, it's just really fascinating how it goes in all different directions. So I'm especially excited to take a closer look at the different choices each director has made in the adaptations, which ones worked, which ones didn't, and why, and what can we learn from these that we can use to evaluate other adaptations of other stories. Yeah, we're definitely going to be relishing in all the delightful weirdness too. For each episode, I'm going to ask Luke and I and listeners at home to rank a top 3 as they read or watch each entry we're covering. So I'll be gathering that feedback so we can analyze it together and figure out what we're responding to as a community. So stay tuned until the end of the episode for the first top 3 question. And quick housekeeping note. We have, of course, heard the rumors that Warner Brothers is considering moving the release date of any and all of their upcoming films, including Dune Part 2, due to the ongoing writer and actor strikes. We're going to continue as planned for now, and if a date change is announced, we'll shift the later episodes of this series accordingly. But I don't know, I personally think Dune is the film Warner Brothers is least likely to move because they've already done so much promotion, and it being Dune with that cast, it kind of promotes itself. Mostly, I don't think they'll want to move it out of that prime awards window sweet spot, as it's expected to be a powerful contender at the Oscars. Between Dune and Barbie, the WB could have a very good year, even if they move The Color Purple and the rest of the slate. So moving this film, it would also show bad faith that the studios aren't interested in negotiating. Not that that's going to necessarily stop anyone, but on that note, we just want to say that when we get into the new adaptations, we're here to promote the work of the creatives, the actors, the crew involved, based on the guidelines provided by the WGA and SAG-AFTRA. And we believe it's important to highlight who it is that really makes our entertainment and demonstrate why they deserve to earn a fair wage for what they bring into the world and why their genius cannot be replicated or replaced by the next studio exec cost-cutting measure, AI or otherwise. Luke, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with all of that. I did want to ask you one question in this introductory episode, Elysia, which is, do you think any of the adaptations that have been released so far actually live up to the book?
Yeah, I was actually discussing this with a friend earlier, and I was saying, I think this is one of those cases where collectively together they get there. Each one has different pieces that they need, but none of them on their own. No.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I'd also say that I think the urge to adapt Dune as a movie or as a mini series is wrong. It needs to be.
It needs to be at least a miniseries.
HBO or Apple need to pick this up and do like a 10 episode, at least
the
a
last
10
of Dune.
episode.
Yeah.
Adaptation
Dune of us
to do it properly in my opinion.
No, I agree. I agree. I know that was exactly my feeling with the Villeneuve film, and also I did find out like a lot of the things I was upset about them cutting apparently were originally in the plan, and then they just cut for time because a lot of the coolest things in the novel are those scenes with the subtle politics and learning about the world and. I think a lot of filmmakers aren't sure how to translate that.
Because the thing I always compare it to is V for Vendetta.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever read the graphic novel for V for Vendetta.
I have not.
But there's a lot more stuff in there that builds out the world. So there's a lot more stuff about Chancellor Sutler's background. There's this whole thing about this artificial intelligence they've created to spy on people. None of that makes it into the movie. But at its heart, V for Vendetta is actually quite a simple story. You can actually prune all of that stuff and keep the bits of the story that really matter. Whereas Dune, I always feel if you take any part out of it, you're weakening the whole. It's like playing Jenga.
It's so intricately woven. Yeah, it's true. All right, well, we're going to get into what Dune is, where it came from, and who the fuck Frank Herbert is, right after this quick commercial break.
Receive the wisdom of Princess Irulan's writings.
Psst. Editorial note for anyone who doesn't know. Princess Irulan is the character who will be played by Florence Pugh in Dune Part 2. We'll talk about her a bit later this episode, and a whole lot more in the weeks to come. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled podcasting. So, Luke, how much do you know about Herbert and the Dune backstory?
I know a little bit about Frank Herbert. I know he did a lot of things. He was a journalist. He was a speechwriter for a Republican senator.
Yeah.
He was a hydrographer, which makes a big difference to the story. So this was a guy that went into the desert looking for water, particularly the deserts of the western United States.
Yeah, he was as a journalist that he discovered the Oregonian dunes. He was sent to write a story about some encroaching European crabgrass. Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't realize he'd done that as a journalist. He allegedly enjoyed the occasional dalliance with magic mushrooms, which I think you probably pick up in the book in various ways.
What's
allegedly.
The spice? Yeah.
And I know that the sort of inspiration for Dune is drawn from a lot of places, but a couple of the key texts are histories of the Russian conquest of the Caucasus in the 19th century.
Okay. Oh, that's a new one for me.
He also leans quite heavily on like various sort of explorer books. I think we read Wilfred Thessinger's book, which is a travel log about walking through the Arabian desert.
Okay.
And as we did some research ahead of this podcast, obviously there is a lot of Arabic influence in Dune.
Some Bedouin. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Arabic language picked up, but there's also bits of Hebrew, bits of Turkish.
Dutch even.
Bits of Berber.
I mean, he really drew from all over the place. But of course, a lot of it is desert cultures because,
Yeah. I mean, people always talk about it being the Arabian desert, but I've always thought of it as the Sahel, which is like the southern rim of the Sahara Desert. Basically because in like the harshest parts of the Arabian desert, people don't actually live there permanently. People pass through it. But there's not enough water to actually sustain life, whereas the Sahel always, to me, strikes as closer to what Arrakis is, because actually there are settled communities. You do have to be very careful about water and moisture, but there actually are permanent settled communities in that desert.
I mean, it's not that the Fremen don't move around, but
they're not a nomadic people.
Though, despite the fact that it's based on the dunes from Oregon that Herbert was assigned to write a story about, I haven't been there myself, but I've seen pictures, and I have to say that the depictions, indeed, and my headcanon have the sand planet Arrakis looking a lot more like the Sahara, for sure. But the story of Dune, or the Dune Chronicles, which started with the first book, simply called Dune, published in 1965, as you said, Luke, is a creation of Frank Herbert, and he was born in 1920, raised in rural Washington state, and moved one state down to live with his aunt and uncle in Oregon at the age of 17. He was known for his sharp mind, having become an avid reader at a young age, and he was an extrovert, making friends easily. But I do have to wonder if this moving in with relatives in high school had any influence on the way Paul Atreides, the main character of Dune, seems to be more at ease with like uncle-like figures like Duncan Idaho than his own parents in the first half of the book. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I hadn't considered that. Although actually, I do think he actually is quite at ease with his mother and father, given the sort of social system and the politics of it.
Given that they're aristocrats.
Given that they're aristocrats.
Rigid social structure. Yeah. I think that has a lot to do with his mother's ease and We'll get into that obviously next week, but yeah. But anyway, but Frank Herbert, he started his writing career at local newspapers, married in 1941, had a daughter the next year, Penny, who passed away last year at the age of 80. And he got divorced a year later. And in between, in 42, he served as a Navy photographer and came home with a head injury. In Oregon, he went back to newspaper work, studied fiction at the University of Washington, where in 1946, he met and married fellow writer Beverly Ann Stewart, mother of the younger Bruce, who sadly passed away in 1993, and the elder Brian, who continued his father's series after Frank's death at the age of 65, And yeah, Brian and his co-writer added more than a dozen books to the 6 millennia-hopping opuses published by Frank before his death. At age 76, Brian Herbert is still going strong and plans to release his next Dune novel this fall. Now, have you read any of Brian's novels?
No, I haven't, actually. I've only read Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune.
Okay. Well, season 2 of The Wool Shift Dust here on the public feed will cover the first 2 books, Dune, and eventually in November, Dune Heretic, and all of the adaptations thereof. Because, in fact, these are the only 2 books in the Dune series anyone has ever attempted to adapt, along with the 3rd book, Children of Dune, which is combined with Dune Heretic for the Children of Dune Syfy series, which will be the last thing we cover this season. If you're curious why no one has attempted to adapt beyond that point, just how wild this story gets in its telling of future humanity through thousands of years of intergalactic war and evolution and devolution and back again, there will be a book club to keep the story going, but that's months away, so I'll talk more about that then. For now, we're going to start with the book that started it all, the best known bit of the story. Luke, you said your dad got into the movie first?
Yeah, I don't think my dad has ever read the book.
Okay. What about?
Yeah, no, he's an enormous fan of that 1984 Lynch.
And what about your mom and brother?
My mum is not into any kind of sci-fi and fantasy, and Nathan will watch it because when we were teenagers, we basically had no choice but to watch it at least a couple of times. But yeah, I think he was more confused by it than anything else. He hasn't, to my knowledge, he hasn't read the book.
So your parents gave it to you thinking, oh, this is up your alley, but they hadn't read it themselves?
No, they'd seen the film and they'd seen sort of the politics and the plotting of it, and they knew I liked science fiction, so they thought this would be. And also, I think, again, because I had a lot of time to kill, the fact that it was a doorstopper of a book probably played some role in their choice.
Yeah. My mom definitely fell in love with the Lynch film first. It got her to run out and read all the books and push the books on everyone she knew, like I did with Silo. So that included my dad and later when I was a teenager, me. And I don't remember whether I watched the Lynch film or read the book or played the computer game first.
Oh, I spent so many hours playing that computer game.
I mean, yeah, there's actually a few, but I think both of us are probably talking about the 92 adventure strategy game.
Yes.
Yeah.
So many hours.
Yeah, I was into all 3 very much in the 90s. Yeah. And I don't remember which came first. They were all interwoven together. I think what I personally responded to in this book when I first read it is the world building. So this is a world made by a man who knows many things in detail and can combine them in fantastical new ways that create a framework to think about human psychology, ecology, religion, politics, the meaning and structure of power. Yeah, Herbert, he never graduated from university, but he was what we would call an autodidact, meaning he was like self-taught in all these areas through his reading. And I'm not a libertarian like Herbert was, but we are both idealists. And the subversive way that he approached his science fiction world, like taking the natives' perspective rather than the colonial perspective, I think that's one of the things that really sets him apart from the classic science fiction authors before him. And it definitely heavily influenced the authors who came after him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of similar, but I like the idea of like the inevitability of it all. I think Dune says something quite profound about how history is actually made, in that human beings don't actually make history. They are trapped by the choices that came before them, and they will
cogs
trap
in the wheel.
Yeah, and they will trap people who came after them. And I think Dune gets that across beautifully, because like Dune makes it clear that its characters, all of its characters, even the lead character, even the character with quasi superpowers, only has very limited choices that he can make. He's trapped by what came before him and what comes after him. And I don't know whether it was just because as a somewhat dour teenager, that kind of appealed to me. This idea.
So
It's sort of the line from Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before and will happen again.
Right.
And
Right. That's
I just
very the Wheel of Time, by the way. Yeah.
yeah, I just thought that was really interesting, and I love the way it subverted your expectations of what a hero is supposed to be and who a hero is. And like you say, Herbert is a libertarian. He has a very dim view of any kind of power structure.
Right.
But also, I think he has quite a dim view of human nature in general. In some ways, it is quite a dour, depressing book in that nobody really comes out of it that well.
Yeah, we're coming off the back of Silo, so, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but for all that, it's also just a story about heartbreak and revenge and falling in love and leading a people and, war.
Yeah. It's all of that stuff that really appeals to you when you're 15.
Well, yeah, it's like the essence of humanity.
And like when you read it as an older person, you find stuff in there that you missed.
There's new layers, yeah.
Yeah, there's new layers to it.
Well, yeah, Herbert started researching Dune, which was his third novel, in 1959, just in time for him to turn 40. And he'd apparently been assigned to write an article about those Oregonian sand dunes. The article was never published, but that research became something much bigger, with Herbert going down the Wikipedia rabbit hole researching desert cultures before there was even a Wikipedia. And there may or may not have been magic mushrooms involved. Yeah. And after his wife returned to work in advertising the next year, she supported him as he devoted himself full time to the novel. And in 1963 and 1965, the novel was published in 2 parts, serialized into 8 installments each in Analog Science Fiction magazine. And when he tried to get the entire novel published traditionally, though, it was rejected no fewer than 20 times. For one thing, it was extremely long for a science fiction novel in the 60s. And then, Wikipedia summarizes next in a single tidy paragraph quite nicely what happens after that. So to quote the Frank Herbert article there, Sterling E. Lanier, an editor of Kilton Book Company, known mainly for its auto repair manuals, had read Dune serials and offered a $7,500 advance plus future royalties for the rights to publish them as a hardcover book. Herbert rewrote much of his text. Dune was soon a critical success. It won the Nebula Award for Best Novel in 1965 and shared the Hugo Award in 1966 with And Call Me Conrad by Roger Zelazny. For anyone who doesn't know the Hugo and Nebula, they're like the Oscars and Golden Globes of the science fiction writing world, and Zelazny is one of like the greatest science fiction writers of all time. So, Luke, did any of that surprise you?
No, I'd sort of done my own research ahead of the podcast, so I think you picked up on all the stuff that I did.
And then after publication, Dune was a respectable size success, helping Herbert at least get other work in journalism, education, photography, and he even worked in Vietnam and Pakistan as a social and ecological consultant for a while. But by the end of 1973, his novel Dune, the 1969 sequel Dune Messiah, and his other work had earned him enough to not only become a full-time author, but also buy a second home in Hawaii. And he did also write a bunch of non-Dune science fiction books, by the way. Most were bestsellers, but I haven't read any of them yet. I might have to change that. What about you, Luke?
No, I haven't read anything that's not Dune related from Frank Herbert.
But he's, of course, most famously associated with Dune, and he published the third novel, Children of Dune, in 1976. During the 70s, a cult filmmaker named Jodorowsky tried to develop an adaptation to the first novel with art from Mobius and Giger, the latter of which would most iconically go on to be used in the Alien films. And this adaptation was going to be 14 hours long and star his own son, plus Orson Welles, Salvador Dali, yes, he of the Melting Clock paintings, a young Mick Jagger, and so many more. And the whole production was just going to be too big. And they had Pink Floyd was supposed to do the soundtrack. It was just,
this production kind of lost all touch with reality, basically.
So no surprise, it got canceled. But you can bet we're dedicating an entire episode to this one with the jaw-dropping documentary that covers it all the crazy details. Have you seen the doc yet, Luke?
No, but it's one of those. It's one of the reasons I'm glad we're doing this podcast, because it will finally give me the nudge I need to dig that documentary out, because it's been on my to watch list forever.
Yeah.
Because the story of the Jodorowsky adaptation just sounds so nuts. Everything I've heard about it, I can't wait to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, The Doc is a good movie in and of itself in its own right. I'm excited to revisit it because I definitely am forgetting some of the details. And it's also Jodorowsky. You know, he's interviewed himself, and he's such a character, Spanish guy, and it's just it's a good film. It's gonna be a fun one to talk about.
And just to go back to Hans Rudy Giger, apparently, because there's a really good alien documentary on the making of Alien that I watched a little while back. Apparently, Giger actually showed the storyboards that he'd drawn for Dune to Ridley Scott, and that was part of
Ridley Scott was going to he was going to do his own adaptation and ended up doing Blade Runner instead. Yeah.
I'd actually really like to see a Ridley Scott adaptation of Dune because he'd certainly get the visual métier of it right.
So then Herbert's fourth Dune novel, God Emperor of Dune, aka the book where things really start to get wild, was released in 1981. Heretics of Dune in 84, the same year Lynch's movie came out, and also the year Herbert's wife passed away after a long illness. So it was one hell of a roller coaster year for him. The movie was a critical and commercial success in Europe and Asia, though less warmly received in the US at first. But obviously, there were a lot of Americans who felt the way my mom and your dad did about it, because even before this podcast series, I'm going to bet that pretty much everyone listening has at least heard of this 40-year-old movie, if not already seen it yourself. So I think that's a pretty good mark of success.
If you haven't, go and watch it because you'll enjoy it. You may not enjoy it for the most highbrow of reasons, but it's a trip.
It's a fun ride. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be watching it together in a few weeks. Yeah. Frank Herbert's final Dune book was Chapter House Dune, published a year later in 1985, which is the same year he remarried to a former publisher. And he'd planned a seventh and final novel for the series, but he passed away in 1986 before he could complete it from complications related to a surgery for pancreatic cancer. More than a decade later, his son Brian, with the help of writer Kevin J. Anderson, would pick the series back up with, amongst others, 2 final books to complete the original series based on his father's notes for that planned 7th novel. Those were Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Doom, published in 2006 and 2007. But Brian had several thousand pages of his father's notes to pull from, so they've written a bunch more Dune books besides that, set during the original series, just before it, and 10,000 years earlier during the Butlerian Jihad. Now, these books are still being published to this day. Does talking about Frank Herbert's life change anything about how you interpret the novel, Luke?
I do think Herbert's politics are interesting because, like, in researching for this episode, I came across several articles arguing that Dune is a problematic book. In that you could say Oriental, you can make an argument that it Orientalizes the Fremen. You know, it treats them as exotic others that are waiting for a savior from outside.
I mean, but I disagree because you look through their eyes more than any other culture in the books.
Yeah, and also I think there's a couple of scenes that are deliberately written to make you think about how everybody from outside Dune is complicit in what is going on. I think the interesting thing is Dune is very open to interpretation in its politics. I think Herbert had a very clear sense of what he wanted to communicate, but I think a lot of other people have picked up other themes that maybe Herbert wasn't keen on stressing or didn't fully consciously realize were in there, or it's kind of death of the author type situation. It's one of those texts that's really dense and you can read a lot into it. And I think it is one of those books that you take out what you bring to it in a lot of ways, in terms of your own prejudices and your own worldview.
I mean, yeah, I think that can be said about a lot of things. You can interpret it your own way. We'll definitely be talking about some of the more controversial aspects of the novel and also what Frank Herbert has stated, or what we can infer based on what he has said was his original intention with different aspects of it. But it is also one of those ones where you can tell he wrote the first book and then he had some thoughts about it. And the second book kind of answers to the first book. So I look forward to, we're not going to get to that until after we cover the first Villeneuve, actually the first two Villeneuve movies, because the third movie is going to be based on that second book. But it just, yeah, it's interesting. The more books he added, the more layers he adds to. Yeah.
And I mean, I haven't read God Emperor of Dune because I've read like synopses of it, and I've just read the synopses and thought, no,
it's wild.
No, I am not. I am not ready to handle that.
Well, yeah, we won't be doing that one in the public podcast, but in a Dune book club, and it's gonna be a fun one. But that's a while away. But even the first couple books, which are by far the most contained and accessible, they've been deemed quote unquote unfilmable. Though, yeah, at least CGI is helping with the sandworms. So just wait until you see what the sandworms looks like in the 2000 adaptation. But yeah, there's a huge cast of characters, a number of interconnected subplots, entire ecosystems and cultures being brought to life. And yeah, hence all the different takes in the adaptations. I would say variety is a spice of life, but in Dune, the spice melange is a spice of life and precognition and space travel.
And also that there's one particular character that is very difficult to adapt, and that is the Princess Irulan, because she's not actually in the book, but she provides these little epigraphs to all the
Well, it's going to be an
book.
interesting one to see how the different. It's interesting to see how the different adaptations handle that. You know, for instance, in the Villeneuve, how they had instead Chani do those opening, monologues. So we'll definitely be talking, because she does become she becomes an important character. We won't spoil anything, but she's important. Yeah. And yeah, Jodorowsky's Dune was, by the way, actually the second attempt to adapt the novel. And after that, the baton passed to Ridley Scott, as I said, who abandoned the project for Blade Runner, at which point Dune landed in Lynch's lap for what might be the most memorable and maybe least faithful of the adaptations that made it to the screen. Aside from games, the Syfy adaptation was the next one to tackle the series, with Dune in 2000 and Children of Dune in 2003. They are the least known of the adaptations, but two of Syfy's biggest releases from that heyday era that included Farscape and Battlestar Galactica.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Children of Dune has baby James McAvoy in it, doesn't it? Yeah, it has baby James McAvoy in it.
It's not a bad thing. Like the costumes are funny. The special effects are even funnier, but yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah. And after that, there was a failed attempt for Paramount to adapt a movie between 2008 and 2011. And yeah, Brian Herbert and writing partner Kevin J. Anderson were signed on as advisors. And then finally, the adaptation that frankly brings us here today, Villeneuve's 3-part take on the first two novels in Herbert's series. Now, later in the series, we'll revisit the film from 2021, which roughly covers the first half of the novel, a film many Dune fans, including myself, have ambivalent feelings about. But yeah, man, does it personally, for me at least, nail the look of the universe.
Yeah, I'd say I'm ambivalent about it. I'm going to wait to pass judgment till I've seen the second film, because it kind of feels unfair to judge it at the halfway point.
I just know what I'm missing from the first half, and then I hear that a lot of these scenes actually were planned and then were taken out, and I'm like, ah. But there's a lot of things that it did exceptionally well, better than all the other adaptations. So
yeah, I have to say, one thing I do like about Villeneuve's Dune is the casting, because like Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto Atreides and Josh Brolin, particularly as Gurney Halleck, they just are those characters. And I think those two in particular are really good bits of casting. As is Timothy Chalamet.
I think overall, I think all of the casting has been good. Not all of the characterization landed for me 100%. We'll get into it.
We'll get into it.
So I recently did an episode of Properly Howard, which is a podcast, one of the affiliates in the Lorehounds Network, like us. We did a Dune episode on the 2021. So I ended up watching the 84 and the 2021 preparation for that, and also just prepping for this series that we're doing now. And I was surprised that the 84 movie also cut some things that I had, for some reason, convinced myself it hadn't. Although I know that there is also a longer version. So I'm definitely going to be
Yeah.
diving into and comparing the two versions when we get to that one.
Yeah, and I mean, David Lynch was
Right.
famously not happy with the final cut of
Right. He
that
wouldn't even
film.
use his own
I
name.
mean,
Yeah.
David Lynch actually wanted his name taken off of
Yeah.
that film because he was so unhappy with the way it was cut. And it's weird. You changed the whole trajectory of David Lynch's career because he's never done a big budget movie since, never wanted to do a big budget
Yeah.
movie
Well, I can't blame him.
since, and he's talked about this at length. He didn't like the amount of control that the studio, with that kind of budget, he didn't like the amount of control that the studio insisted on exercising. So it completely changed the trajectory of his career.
Yeah, we're going to be going through all these adaptations leading up to the new film, and a week before the currently scheduled release for part 2, we're going to look at the trailers and recap what we can expect from the second film. And we'll be back a week after the release to talk through that new film with you too. And then finally, we'll wrap up this season of Dune coverage with the second book, Dune Messiah, and the Children of Dune sci-fi adaptation, to look ahead at what to expect from Villeneuve's Dune Part 3, assuming it gets the green light. Are you ready to become a Dune expert, Luke, or a Dune spurt, should we say?
A Dune spurt? Like I said, I prefer to think of it as becoming a mentat. If a mentat, or possibly in your case, a Bene Gesserit's sister. But...
I mean, I see no gender boundaries becoming a mentat, but no, I'd rather be a Bene Gesserit. It's like for Wheel of Time fans, it's like the Aes Sedai.
Yeah, they get the cooler outfit.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm most looking forward to talking about is just how much everyone's going to see Dune everywhere after this, like Star Wars, Wheel of Time, Avatar, etc. I don't think everybody realizes how much stuff we love today has indirectly come from this book.
It's everywhere. When you actually start to think about it, it's genuinely frightening how influential this book has been. And some people get what Dune is about and take stuff from that. Some people, I think, have wildly misinterpreted Dune and what it was really about. I'm looking at you, Star Wars. I'm looking at you, George Lucas. Yeah. It's just an incredibly influential book, and like you say, when you realise how influential it's been, you see it everywhere.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, and for everyone at home who's following along, I definitely obviously recommend reading. I'm going to be doing my reread this time rather quickly myself. But yeah, it's the best way to get the full picture and immerse yourself in that world. But for those of you who don't have the time or desire, don't worry. We'll be breaking the whole book down, all the major characters, settings, themes, and plot points, so that you can understand the bones of the story and feel fully planted in this world. And then we'll tackle the adaptations and look at how well they brought that world and story to life. For those of you who have read or are reading along, my first top 3 question for you is, when you're reading the first book or thinking about the first book, what are your 3 favorite scenes from this book and why? It can be the most memorable scenes, the scenes that moved you the most or surprised you the most, or just the 3 book scenes that stick out to you in whatever way. I'll throw up a post on Twitter. Yes, I'm still calling it Twitter now and forever. And you can also hop onto the We'll Shift Dust channel of the Lorehounds Discord to share your takes there. Or you can also email them to us at we'llshiftdustpodcast@gmail.com. And Luke and I will, of course, share our top 3s live in the next episode.
If people are interested, by the way, I know there are several audio versions of it. The one I've been listening to is the one that is available on Audible, and it is the one that lists Simon Vance as the narrator. Obviously, there's a full cast, but it's the one that lists Simon Vance as the main narrator.
Okay. And you heartily recommend it.
I do. It's a really good production.
Yeah, and also looking ahead a few episodes, I'd love to hear from people who have played the Dune video games from the 90s and beyond. So yeah, please tell me what you can remember. I'd especially love some voice memos on this topic. You can email them to me at we'llshiftdustpodcast@gmail.com again, that email address in the notes. And meanwhile, the Silo Book Club is heating up on Patreon. You'll find both part 2 of my Hugh Howey interview there, as well as the full breakdown of the first book in the Silo series, Wool. So yes, We're giving away all the spoilers about what's going to happen next in the story, with Sam of Silo TV fans fame this time to protect Luke's show-only innocence. You can find the book club at patreon.com/woolshiftdust. And I want to personally thank the new Silozins who have joined the book club since we aired our Silo Awards episode. Paul Kent, Merciless Fur, Stu, Samartian, Dan G, Melly B, Cliff J, Tom S, Lisa Fancher, aka Lady Walker Fan, Matthew M, James N, Diane D, Laura E, Redhead Shannon, Natalie L, Aurelio, Josh W, Faisal M, Salsa, Kim Shong, aka The Lone Token, or that chick who plays bass, Nano Nate's Great, Chris C, Ranga B, Paige C, and Nancy M. Sam and I love having you all reading, listening, and discussing with us. And there's still time to get in shift feedback before this weekend if you want in on that discussion too. And this podcast was published by the Lorehounds, a podcast community dedicated to deep dives and hot takes just like this. I'm one of the co-hosts of the MCU Universe series on the Lorehounds feed, where we're just wrapping up our coverage of Secret Invasion. The show isn't everything we hoped it would be, but there's a lot to analyze, from the interesting seeds for future storytelling to what exactly went wrong with the realization of it all.
I've got to say, as a listener, I think you guys have gone out of your way to be fair and balanced on that show, because it would be so easy to rip it limb from limb, and you didn't.
I mean, the show has its fans too. There are people who genuinely enjoyed it. So, I mean, we tried to be fair, and if we're gonna, we talked about that there are things. It's not a complete dumpster fire. We talked about the things that we liked about it, and if we're going to criticize it, we try to be fair.
And I think you guys did a really good job of trying to highlight both the good and the bad in the show. I think it would have been really easy to just point and laugh and go dumpster fire. And in true Lorehounds fashion, you guys didn't do that.
I mean, and
it's a really good podcast, if I do say so myself.
Oh, thank you. We try to pull out the Easter eggs and things you'll still want to know whether or not you enjoyed the show yourself, because it's still part of the MCU universe. And I'm not someone who's going to cry MCU fatigue. I love the MCU.
And also, if you haven't listened to a podcast he's done so far, Jean has just the best voice for radio ever. It's true. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, deep and velvety. Yeah. And I'll also be popping up with Jean and John, who are two different people. We're in a one-shot to talk about Good Omens, the second season of the Neil Gaiman adaptation. And there will also be episodes coming out soon from the Lorehounds without me, including a primer for Ahsoka Season 2, continuing their coverage of Foundation, which is perfect for Dune fans, as well as One Piece, the Earthsea series of books, Tolkien's Silmarillion, and a bunch of other stuff. And starting in September, I'll be guesting on their Wheel of Time coverage too. And new to the Lorehounds Network is the podcast Properly Howard I mentioned earlier, where Steve and Anthony tackle movies one irreverent take at a time. Their new season, starting this month, is all about remakes, from White Man Can't Jump to The Wicker Man, and including that episode about the 2021 Dune film that I guested on, which will be coming out toward the end of this month, if you want a preview on my thoughts on that film. And Luke, where can people find more of you?
So they can find me at Luke Middup on Twitter. Yes, it is Twitter. It will always be Twitter. And I also do another podcast with a couple of friends from uni. It Could Be Said, all one word. We look at politics, international relations, and sport.
And I'm also on Twitter and other social media as at Elysia CB. And you can always find me on the Lorehounds Discord too. Talk to you again in a couple of weeks when we'll make sure you know your mentats from your Spacing Guild, see the subtle difference between the Kwisatz Haderach and the Muad'Dib, and understand why there's the Bene Gesserit all along.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.